Hello, and welcome to the Quantum Fit Podcast. I'm Taylor, and I am your host. This podcast is all about applying the different principles of quantum physics and quantum biology as it applies to health and your fitness. This gives us a holistic view of how different environmental factors, like sunlight, or, as in today's podcast, cold, play a major role in your overall health. So you're not just going to hear me talking about, diet, exercise, and having good habits. So what I would recommend is if you really want to make lasting changes in how you feel, think, and act, you should probably listen closely and try to have an open mind to what I have to say. Every day I'll be hitting you with a quick 7 to 15 minute long podcast. I keep it short like this because it allows me to be extremely informative, but also to the point, so you don't feel quite so overwhelmed. Also, I normally don't do any kind of show advertisements, so instead, I ask that you share this podcast with a friend or family member if you enjoyed the message and gained something from it. I want to be able to spread quality and easy to understand content that everybody can take and use in their daily lives. I would highly appreciate it. Now, on to today's episode, biochemical benefits of cold exposure. So, many different biochemicals are released through long-term cold exposure and arguably short-term cold exposure. For instance, think about a cryo chamber, when you get super, super cold. The problem is that there's not a whole lot of studies that have dived into that. Almost all the studies, back to, 1980s and I'm sure way, way, way earlier, all look at long-term cold exposure, up to a couple hours or more of moderate temperatures of, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit or less. So that is my main focus, at least for this podcast. Anyway, before talking about those different biochemicals, I want to talk about the two main cell pathways that are activated by cold. By understanding these, you might be able to predict how cold helps the body. So first up, we have mTOR, M-T-O-R. This is the cell pathway of cell growth, but it also plays a big hand in building new mitochondria and in overall neural development and, consolidating memory and plasticity in the brain, being able to deal with trauma or healing in the brain, things like that. The main signal to activate the various genes and proteins for the mTOR pathway is insulin. And since protein and excess carbs release a ton of insulin, they stimulate mTOR significantly. mTOR is mostly well known for both building muscle and putting on extra fat. So it typically has a good side and a kind of bad side if you're not able to control it properly. I thought I should also mention that too much mTOR without AMPK or AMP, as I like to call it, whatever, which is the next pathway, by the way, is theorized to lead to cancer. In reality, however, that specific story of too much mTOR causing cancer is a half-truth, since cancer is not a problem that can be solved with biochemistry, but instead requires quantum solutions. Anyways, that's a topic for another day. Now, AMPK is the cellular pathway that is tied to calorie restriction and fasting. It's essentially the cleanup crew for the body and disposes of all the excess cellular junk. AMPK also has clearly been shown to be essential for extending not only your lifespan, but your health span. And your health span, it's basically how long you can live while still being free of disease or physical and mental degeneration. Because who cares about living long if you're stuck in a bed, for 50 years or whatever. Now, AMPK again, comes with its own problems. Too much of it, and you run into problems with your body literally eating away at itself for fuel. Because again, the things that typically stimulate AMPK is calorie restriction and fasting. Well, we all know what happens when you fast for days and days and days and days. So you need a balance of both AMPK and mTOR. Here's where cold exposure comes in. It provides the benefits of both pathways without either one's downsides, assuming you're still eating adequately, of course. This means building more muscle, losing fat, healing the body, and possibly even extending your life. So, let's get on to the biochemicals that are responsible for these awesome benefits. Growth hormone is responsible for healing just about every tissue in the body, and your overall levels of growth hormone are a huge sign as to how well you're actually physically aging over time. So, growth hormone always shoots up when your blood sugar levels are very low. This is a constant trend. That's partially why intermittent fasting can be so good for you, is that your growth hormone levels go up because you're not eating for, these long periods of time, and your growth hormone shoots up. It just so happens that cold clears your blood sugar faster than anything else, except maybe, the most hardcore sprinting. This is going to spike your growth hormone levels. And again, you'll get all those other benefits of growth hormone. So this is the first major chemical and probably the most important that cold exposure provides. But the other two chemicals are pretty phenomenal as well. Adiponectin, that's ADIPONECTIN, adiponectin, is a protein released from fat tissue like crazy when the body gets cold. Some studies have found adiponectin levels to increase by as much as 62% during shivering from cold exposure across about an hour and a half or 2 hours of total cold exposure. They start shivering maybe halfway through that. Adiponectin jacks up the body's metabolism and causes you to burn fat like crazy. It also builds new mitochondria within the muscle. It's actually one of the main reasons cold exposure can help you build muscle. Adiponectin destroys inflammation, and it's also connected to longevity. It should also be noted that obese people have very, very little adiponectin, whereas athletic people have the most. Drug companies have been trying to get adiponectin in pill form for years, possibly decades. I'm not sure. But it's kind of ironic because all they need is cold. They don't need a pill. And the last biochemical we have is irisin. 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 It's a protein that's released from muscle tissue instead of fat tissue from cold. However, it's almost always referenced as only being able to be released during exercise. Irisin is able to increase how much brown fat you have to burn fat more efficiently. It can do this through two different ways. It can either stimulate the brown fat you have to actually allow you to create more brown fat, or it can simply cause the so-called browning of white fat. So it'll actually create brand new stores of brown fat out of nowhere, pretty much. I'll get into brown fat in a later podcast, by the way, because I really want to dive deep into that sometime. Anyways, continuing. Irisin lowers levels of a protein called myostatin, which is very, very interesting because myostatin is the main inhibitor of muscle growth. So if you lower myostatin, technically you'll be able to put on much more muscle. So this is the way that irisin can allow you to put on more muscle. Irisin also has an incredible effect that, there's almost nothing else out there, as far as I know, as far as specific proteins are concerned in the body, where it's able to actually lengthen your telomere end caps on your DNA. Basically, the telomere end caps on, your DNA, the helix structure, the end caps on those get shorter and shorter as you age every year. Okay, well, irisin lengthens that, which means technically irisin can probably extend your life by quite a bit, or at least vastly increase your health span, which again is really our main target. So that is also a big reason that cold is highly beneficial. Well, and that's pretty much all I have for those 3 main biochemicals, because again, I want to keep this podcast short. And it should also be noted that these chemicals they're released from casual cold, when you're not what's called non-shivering cold, but deep shivering cold releases them like crazy. Again, you get a jump, and it's like between a 5 and 10-fold increase in the amount of protein, the different proteins you get or the growth hormone you get from cold. And something that should be noted is that although I have done my due diligence and researched the absolute hell out of cold, I did initially find many of these benefits through the website coolfatburner.com. Also, and this is not 100% necessary, but I would recommend looking into that website's ice vest. I use it daily to get my cold exposure in while I work on creating these podcasts and while I write content for my website. I stand 100% behind their product, plus they have studies they've done on their own vests to show its efficacy. If you're interested in picking one up from coolfatburner.com, I do have a coupon code that you could use. It's Kelson5CFB. Again, Kelson, Kelson, the number 5, CFB. I'll put it in the show notes in case you forget and you want to reference back to it. Again, the ice vest is just a convenience. You don't actually need it. I mean, you can always just do ice baths or stand outside in winter if you want to get that good cold exposure. It's just me, personally, it's one of the most convenient biohacks I've ever done because I can basically just sit on my butt and get work done at the same time as I'm getting my cold exposure, whereas otherwise it's really hard to do that. Anyways, that's all I have, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll probably do a follow-up podcast tomorrow or maybe the next day after on cold and cover a different aspect of it. Hopefully, I'm thinking I'll probably dive into the quantum side of things. So, if you have any questions or comments for me, please send them to me over my different socials, such as Instagram. You can find me at Real Quantum Fit, or you can find me on Facebook on my personal Facebook page, Taylor Kelson. If you're listening on the Anchor app, you could also send me a voice message. I would love to get one of those. But all right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.